Hi, this is Daire speaking to you from Lindsborg, Kansas. And I'm just so happy to be with all of you. I do have a Kentucky connection. I lived in Elizabethtown for 15 years, and that's where my wife Denise is from. Um, that's also my connection to Asbury because one of my fellow parishioners at Christ Episcopal Church, which I attended there, ended up going to seminary at Asbury and is now a Lutheran pastor. We're still there in Elizabethtown. So years later, when I knew that I needed to be going to seminary, Asbury was my first choice, and I've been so happy to be here, especially in learning the IBS method, having the camaraderie that I've had, uh, the many fine instructors that I've enjoyed so far, and I'm about halfway through. I just think this is got to be a God thing. I'd almost planned on dropping out, but I got enough scholarship this year to give it another go. And I'm not quite sure how this will all end up, but the ministry I'm called to is connecting the incarcerated to churches, and I know that's a kind of an unpopular task in churches. It's in these rural areas particularly. I know I've heard it many times. Well, we're glad you do it, Pastor, but it's not something we could get involved with. There's all kinds of excuses for that, but Jesus says in Matthew 25 that when you visited these, the least of my brethren, you visited me. And I think when he's saying that, what he's saying when he calls the incarcerated the least of these my brethren, um, the emphasis being on my brethren, I'm thinking what he's really talking about is in the same way that he talked about his disciples as brothers. And he calls each of us brothers and sisters. Um, I think here we're talking about people that, the truth be known, God is calling just like He would call to any of us, gently and pleading that He has purpose, and that purpose is for the good. Um, I guess another way of looking at it is potentially many of these could reach people for Christ that I never would have a hope of reaching. Um, they've got population groups that they're familiar with that um, I think would be ready to hear the word if it was just presented to them in a way that they understand and by people that they have standing with. So, my denomination is, of course, Methodist, but I haven't been a Methodist very long. Just about 7, 8 years now, and the reason I'm a Methodist is because they made it easy to be a preacher. As I maybe mentioned earlier, I've been a local licensed pastor. I'm not currently appointed to a church, however. And actually, I'm attending a Lutheran church for the most part, which is about a block away from my home. It's where my oldest daughter, Perry, who is a math professor at Bethany College, and her husband, Dwight, um, and the two grandkids go. And I'm currently a Sunday school teacher there, so I'm there most Sundays. But I also walk down the street to First United Methodist Church and am maintaining a connection there because you never know. Could be going into the ordained ministry or maybe the diaconate, or maybe this is just going to be some kind of startup venture involving um, ministry to the incarcerated and their families. But that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. I've had a lot of experience preaching over the 5 years I've been appointed to churches. Even prior to that, and all three denominations that I've been involved with, Lutheran, Episcopalian, and Methodist, I've been invited to preach in different circumstances. Some funerals and weddings, of course, that I've been in. I guess the greatest joys I've had in preaching are my Tuesday night sessions at Ottawa County Detention Facility in Minneapolis, Kansas. They're out of a population group of about 50. We usually get about 25 to 30 that come out, and of course they wouldn't be there except voluntarily. Most of them are already believers, but of course, having been incarcerated multiple times for the most part, um, I guess that's my church because sitting in front of me on those nights, I have a group that is ready for change. They know the choices that they've made and they want to make better choices. and they're committed to the idea of this time, maybe it's the last time that I'm in jail. And so what we talk about in the context of a scripture reading and some preaching, and I guess more of a Lectio Divina type reading, because we'll read a short passage through 3 times with the idea of first, what are the words that I'm hearing? The second time through, why would God be wanting me to hear these words? What is it about me? What is it about my circumstances that this is particularly relevant? And then the last time through, pointing to, God, what is it do you want me to do with these words? So that's generally what we do. Challenges, of course, have been funerals. A common passage I turn to is from Luke, the prodigal son, particularly the image of the father seeing his son coming from afar, particularly for a family that um, is wondering why, maybe a suicide or a sudden death. It's important to understand that God sees the whole of our lives, and He looks at each one of us differently than we look at one another. My hope is that I can take my style of extemporaneous speaking and with really build a good solid preparation for preparing for a sermon, so that even though it looks like it's extemporaneous, even though there's not maybe visible notes, by taking in the scripture in a way that's more organized, I can make sure that the message stays on focus. And since this is approaching 7 minutes, I know I can do better. So, concerns and hesitations? Well, I'm just looking forward to being with all of you. God bless each one of you in this wonderful night.